in the Rosewood Estate garden, overflowing with white roses and 350 of New York's most powerful guests. The man who once made the entire underworld tremble is sitting in a wheelchair, waiting for his bride, Sebastian Corsetti, a mafia boss who has washed his hands of violence, a real estate billionaire. The man who, 3 years ago, had an enemy's bullet tear through his spine, stealing his legs but failing to steal his empire. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, but the bride never shows. 30 minutes pass, then an hour, then 2. The murmuring begins to spread through the garden like a low fire creeping across a dry field. Senators, chief executives, financial titans, all of them sitting there, watching the most powerful man in the city get abandoned right in front of their eyes. Poor thing, after that assassination attempt. Money can't buy new legs. Who would want to be tied to a cripple for life? Sebastian hears it all. Every word, every venomous whisper. His hands clamp down on the wheelchair's arms until his knuckles bleach white. Then the message arrives. Thomas, his most loyal bodyguard, steps forward with a face as pale as paper and holds out the phone with trembling hands. Sebastian, I can't. I'm at the airport with Lorenzo. Yes, Lorenzo Valenti, the one you thought was your enemy. He can give me what you can't. A whole man, a future that doesn't require pushing a wheelchair. I'm tired. Oh, and Lorenzo says hello. He says that bullet should have gone through your heart. Lorenzo Valenti, the man who ordered him shot 3 years ago, the man who took his legs, and now he's in bed with Sebastian's fiancée. Sebastian reads the message again and again, once, twice, 3 times, as if the letters might change their meaning if he looks long enough. But they don't. The world collapses without a sound. Then someone opens the voice message Lorenzo attached. His triumphant laughter blasts across the garden. Hey, Corsetti. Victoria's lying next to me right here. She says I ride better than your wheelchair ever could. Congratulations on the wedding, you cripple. Laughter erupts from the side of his rivals. Phones rise into the air, hundreds of them, taking pictures, recording video, as if Sebastian is a dying animal in a zoo. Men who once bowed before him now look at him with contempt, with relish, even with pity. That's it, Corsetti. You're finished. Not even money can keep a woman. Sebastian goes rigid, as if turned to stone. He survived the bullet through his spine. He rebuilt an empire from a wheelchair. But this is tearing him apart from the inside. A single tear, the first in 20 years, drops down. And then, in the middle of that hell, a woman steps out from the kitchen. She isn't wearing a gown. She isn't draped in diamond jewelry. She's only in the plain black uniform of the household staff, her light blonde hair loose over her shoulders, her green eyes fixed straight ahead. Claire Sullivan, a 27-year-old widow, a single mother to a 6-year-old little girl born with a congenital heart condition, a woman who once lived in her car with her daughter, who once dropped to her knees in a hospital begging for a miracle, who once nearly let go of everything on a dark, rain-soaked night. She walks through the garden, through the staring eyes, through the poisonous whispers, through her own fear, until she stops directly in front of the most powerful man in New York, and she kneels. 350 people hold their breath. What she asked him in that moment changed both of their lives forever. If you want to know what Claire asked Sebastian, please press like and share this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part. Silence draped itself over the garden like an invisible curtain. 350 people held their breath. No one daring to move, no one daring to whisper. All of them stared at the woman kneeling before the most powerful boss in New York. Claire Sullivan lifted her face, her green eyes looking straight into the dark, shadowed eyes of Sebastian Corsetti. There was no pity in her gaze. There was no fear, only pure respect, and a resolve so steady that she didn't even understand where it had come from. Her lips moved, and when her voice emerged, it was soft enough that only the two of them could hear. Sir, would you give me the honor of a dance? Sebastian felt as if lightning had struck him. In the 3 years he'd been trapped in this wheelchair, he'd heard more pity than he could count, more false comfort, more averted eyes from people who didn't know where they were supposed to look. But no one, not a single person, had ever asked him this. Claire, his voice came out rough, as though something were lodged in his throat. I can't dance. You know that. Claire smiled, gentle, and yet carrying a strength Sebastian had never seen in any woman. Then we'll dance in our own way, sir. Sebastian shook his head, his eyes dropping to the wheelchair as if it were a lifelong curse. Why? Why are you doing this? You'll lose your job. You'll be laughed at. You'll become the joke of this entire city. Claire didn't flinch. She stayed kneeling, kept looking straight into his eyes, as though the 350 prying stares around them simply didn't exist. Because it's the right thing to do, sir. Because a good man like you doesn't deserve to end today in loneliness and humiliation. Because the people laughing at you aren't worth you lowering your head. Sebastian felt something splinter inside his chest. Not his heart breaking all over again, but the wall he'd built over the last 3 years collapsing, piece by piece. He looked into Claire's eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't see pity. He didn't see fear. He didn't see disgust or avoidance. He saw only one human being truly seeing another. Not a mafia boss, not a real estate billionaire, not a pathetic cripple, just Sebastian. Just a man in pain who needed to be seen. His hand trembled as he slowly loosened his grip on the wheelchair's arm. He looked at Claire once more, as if searching for any hint of deception. But there was none. Only sincerity, clear as crystal. Sebastian Corsetti, the man who once made the entire underworld tremble, nodded. Claire rose to her feet and turned toward the band, frozen like statues. Her voice lifted, steady and unshaking, carrying across the garden swallowed by silence. Please, play the music. The band exchanged startled looks. Then all of them turned as one toward Sebastian, as though waiting for permission. The most powerful boss in New York gave a small nod. A nod no one but the bandleader likely even saw. And then the first notes of Moon River rose into the air, mellow and tender, like a silver river flowing through a moonlit night. Claire stepped to the back of the wheelchair, her hands settling gently on the handles. She began to move, slowly and deliberately, guiding the chair in time with the music. It wasn't a traditional waltz that any of those 350 guests had ever seen. It was something entirely new, entirely different, entirely theirs. Claire moved around the wheelchair as if she were dancing with it, turning the very thing the world treated as an obstacle into part of the dance. Sometimes she stepped to the right, the black skirt of her housekeeper's uniform lifting lightly in the late afternoon breeze. Sometimes she leaned forward, her pale blonde hair spilling down like a silk curtain, and sometimes she stopped directly in front of Sebastian, lowering herself to his eye level, and held out her hand. Sebastian hesitated for a heartbeat, then reached out and took it. His fingers trembled, but he didn't let go. Claire's hand was warm and steady, like an anchor holding him in place in the middle of a storm that was tearing his soul apart. They moved together, Claire guiding the wheelchair along soft, curving paths, as if they'd practiced this dance for a lifetime, instead of meeting only in this moment. She turned, one arm extended with quiet grace, then came back to him again, her hand finding his hand. 350 people stood silent as paper. There were no more whispers, no more sneers, no more camera clicks or videos recording. They simply stood there, spellbound by something they couldn't name but could feel deep in their hearts. This wasn't pity. This wasn't charity. This was dignity. This was respect. This was the purest beauty of one human being offered to another. Sebastian lifted his face to Claire when she stopped before him once more. In those green eyes, he didn't see the reflection of a pathetic cripple. He saw himself. Whole, complete, as if the bullet years ago had never taken anything at all. For the first time in 3 years, Sebastian Corsetti felt himself being seen as a human being. Not the mafia boss people feared, not the billionaire people flattered, not the disabled man people pitied, just Sebastian, a man with a bleeding heart and a soul starving to be healed. A tear slid down his cheek, then another, then another. He didn't try to hide them. He didn't try to swallow them back. For the first time in 20 years, Sebastian Corsetti allowed himself to cry in front of other people. But these were no longer tears of humiliation. These were tears of release. Claire kept moving, gentle and careful, as if she understood he needed time, needed space, needed permission to be weak without being judged. Moon River continued to drift through the air, each note seeming to tell the story of 2 lost souls finding one another in a cruel world. From the kitchen window, a 6-year-old little girl with wide, round eyes watched her mother. Lily Sullivan stood beside Rosa, her small hands gripping the hem of the cook's skirt. Tears streamed down her chubby cheeks as she whispered in a voice full of awe, "Mom is so beautiful." Rosa nodded, her own eyes glistening. "Your mother is very brave, Lily. Braver than anyone in that garden." The song slowly reached its final notes. Claire made one last turn, then stopped directly in front of Sebastian, taking both his hands in hers. They held each other's gaze in a moment where time seemed to stop. The last note faded into nothing. Silence lay over the garden for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single clap rang out. 1 clap, then 2, then 10. And then, like a tidal wave that couldn't be stopped, applause detonated across the garden. 350 guests rose to their feet at once, hands striking together without pause. Some wiped away tears. Some nodded with open admiration. Even a few of the rivals who had been laughing at Sebastian just minutes earlier were standing now, clapping in silence, their eyes carrying something no one could quite read. Catherine Corsetti, the formidable woman who had ruled the Corsetti Empire beside her husband for 40 years, stood in the front row with trembling hands covering her mouth. She was crying. For the first time since her husband died, she cried in front of other people. Thomas, the loyal bodyguard, stood beside his master's wheelchair with the first smile of the day spreading across his face. The applause went on as if it never wanted to end, but Sebastian couldn't hear any of it. His ears rang, his mind narrowed to the woman standing before him, her hand still holding his. When the clapping finally began to fade, Sebastian tightened his grip on Claire's hand, his voice rough, as if he'd just crossed a desert. Why? Why are you doing all of this? For what reason? You're just a housekeeper. You don't owe me anything. Claire looked at him, her green eyes glinting beneath the late afternoon sun as it began to dim. She drew a deep breath, as though she were bracing herself to say something she'd kept hidden for a long time. You're wrong, sir. I do owe you. I owe you my daughter's life. Sebastian blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. Your daughter? I don't understand. Claire smiled. But that smile carried a pain only those who had stood at the edge of loss could ever truly understand. 3 years ago, sir. Mount Sinai Hospital. Lily, my daughter, needed an emergency heart surgery. The cost was $200,000. I had $847 in my account. She paused for a moment, her voice tightening. The doctor said that if she didn't have the surgery within 48 hours, she wouldn't make it. I knelt in the hospital chapel, praying to anyone who would listen. I prayed to God, to Daniel, even to the stars in the sky. I had nothing left but that plea. Sebastian stayed silent, his memory searching, digging for something he'd forgotten long ago. Claire went on, her voice sounding as though she were recounting a dream. Then the chapel door opened. You were there, in your wheelchair, looking at me. You didn't say much. You only asked one question. How much? I told you I couldn't accept it, that I had no way to pay you back, but you didn't care. You only said. She stopped, tears beginning to slide down her cheeks. You said, children aren't to blame for the injustices of this world. And then you left. The bill was paid. You never mentioned it again. You don't even remember me. Sebastian went still. The memory returned slowly, blurred as an image seen through fog. He remembered that day. He remembered a woman on her knees, sobbing in the chapel. He remembered those desperate eyes. But he had never known that woman was the same housekeeper who had worked in his estate for nearly 3 years. Lily, he whispered, the name flashing through his mind like a beam of light. Claire nodded, tears pouring down. Yet the smile on her lips was brighter than it had ever been. She's alive, sir. She's healthy. She's standing in that kitchen right now, watching her mother dance with the man who saved her life. So today, when I saw you sitting here alone, abandoned by the whole world, I knew what I had to do. Because you deserve it. Because good people deserve to be treated with kindness. Sebastian looked at her, his eyes wet, but something else was there now. No longer only brokenness, no longer despair, but a small, fragile spark of hope beginning to kindle. Thank you, he whispered, his voice shaking. Thank you, Claire Sullivan. And for the first time in 3 years, Sebastian Corsetti smiled. That night, while Sebastian and Claire still hadn't even had the chance to leave the Rosewood Estate garden, the video of their dance spread across social media like a wildfire no one could put out. The hashtag the Mafia and the Maid exploded on every platform, becoming a global trend in just 6 hours. Millions watched, hundreds of thousands shared, tens of thousands of comments poured in like a flood, and public opinion split more violently than ever. Half the world praised Claire like an angel. She's the bravest person I've ever seen. This is the most beautiful thing this year. She saved a man's dignity when the whole world turned its back. But the other half showed no mercy. She just wants the boss's money. A maid climbing up, a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Who wouldn't jump at it? She's probably been in bed with him for a long time. This is just a staged performance. Opportunistic, taking advantage when someone's at their weakest. Claire read those comments in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, her hands trembling as she clutched an old, worn phone. Lily sat beside her, wide eyes fixed on her mother with a worry no 6-year-old child should have to carry. But the real storm was only beginning. The next morning, Victoria Ashford appeared on the most famous morning television show in America. She sat there in a black dress, as if she were in mourning, her face bare of makeup, her eyes reddened with tears that fell at exactly the moment the camera zoomed in close. Lorenzo Valenti sat beside her, his hand gripping Victoria's hand like a lover shielding the woman he loved from the entire world. "I've endured too much," Victoria sobbed, her voice trembling with a perfection that felt as though it had been practiced in the mirror hundreds of times. "Sebastian controlled me for 3 years. He monitored every call, checked every message, isolated me from my friends and my family. I had to run to save my life. Lorenzo was the only one brave enough to stand up and protect me." Lorenzo nodded, his face wearing the mask of a hero defending a fragile woman. "Sebastian Corsetti is a brutal man," he said, his voice full of counterfeit righteousness. "Victoria has suffered too much. I will protect her, and I will protect New York from his criminal empire." The host nodded with heartfelt sympathy, and not a single person asked why Victoria had run straight into the arms of the man who had once ordered the assassination of her fiancé. No one asked why her message had been so vicious and contemptuous. No one cared about the truth. They only cared about drama, about ratings, about those beautiful tears on live television. And then the paparazzi came. Claire's tiny Brooklyn apartment suddenly became the center of dozens of camera lenses. They swarmed the building from morning until night, screaming questions through the windows, blocking her path every time she stepped outside. "Claire, are you involved with Sebastian Corsetti? Did you dance with him for money or for love? What do you think about Victoria's accusations? Are you trying to seduce a billionaire?" Lily was so frightened she didn't dare go to school. She hid behind the curtains, staring out at the chaotic crowd outside with eyes full of terror. Claire pulled her child into her arms, drew the curtains shut, and tried to shield her daughter from the storm tearing through their lives. That night, in the dark apartment with the curtains tightly closed, Claire sat on the worn, fraying sofa, holding Lily, who had fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion. She looked up at the ceiling and wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd only wanted to do the right thing. She'd only wanted to repay the man who had saved her daughter's life. But now the whole world was turning its back on her, and she didn't know if she had the strength to endure it. 3 days after the media storm, a glossy black Rolls-Royce pulled up in front of a worn, aging apartment building in Brooklyn. The walls were stained with damp patches. The rusted iron stairs squealed with every step, and the smell of mildew mixed with food from dozens of crowded apartments hit the nose the moment you entered. Sebastian Corsetti sat in his wheelchair, staring down the dim hallway with an expression he could hardly believe. Thomas pushed him past puddles pooled on cracked concrete, carefully steering around peeling sections of wall that looked ready to fall at any moment. This was where Claire Sullivan had lived for the last 3 years. This was where the woman who worked for him 12 hours a day came back to after bone-deep shifts. This was where she raised a daughter with a heart condition, while carrying the weight of crushing medical debt. And he, Sebastian Corsetti, the billionaire with a real estate empire stretching across New York, had never known. The door to apartment 37 opened after the third knock. Claire stood there, dark circles beneath her eyes from sleepless nights, her pale blonde hair hastily tied back at the nape of her neck. She froze when she saw Sebastian, then her gaze swept the hallway as if checking whether anyone was watching. "Sir, you shouldn't be here," she said, her voice tight with worry. "The paparazzi could—" "I've handled them," Sebastian replied, his tone calm, but his eyes never leaving her exhausted face. Thomas and the security team cleared the area. "No one will bother you anymore." Claire hesitated for a beat, then finally stepped aside and opened the door wider to let him in. The apartment was smaller than a dressing room in his estate. A single bed pressed into the corner for Lily. A worn, fraying sofa with faded patches of fabric where Claire slept every night. Library books stacked neatly on a rough wooden shelf she must have built herself. Children's scribbles taped all over walls mottled with damp stains. And on a small cabinet beside the bed, a photograph in a cheap wooden frame. A young man in a police uniform, smiling brightly, eyes full of love. Daniel Sullivan. Sebastian took in the room, and it felt as if someone were squeezing his heart in a fist. Nearly 3 years. For nearly 3 years, she had worked for him, cleaning his grand estate, serving his lavish parties, and every night she came back here. This room, this life. You live here? His voice came out hoarse, as if something were lodged in his throat. 3 years working for me, and you live here? Claire didn't answer. She simply stood there, back straight, chin lifted, her green eyes meeting his without a trace of shame or insecurity. This is my home, sir. I'm not ashamed of it. Why didn't you tell me? Sebastian asked, urgency creeping into his voice. I could have helped. What could you have done? Claire cut in, her voice gentle but unyielding. Give me money? Raise my pay? And then what would people say? The housekeeper favored by her employer? I don't want pity, sir. I want to stand on my own 2 feet. Before Sebastian could respond, small footsteps sounded from behind the curtain separating the tiny kitchen corner. Lily Sullivan appeared, her round eyes like 2 glossy black gems, her lightly curled blonde hair tied into 2 little braids. She stopped when she saw Sebastian, her eyes widening even more. Mom, Lily squealed, her clear voice filling the cramped room. Wheelchair mister is here. She ran toward Sebastian, her little feet pattering across the worn wooden floor. Claire moved as if to stop her, but Lily had already reached the wheelchair and come to a halt, her eyes shining like stars. Mom, it's him. He's here. He saved me. I remember him. Sebastian felt as if someone had just driven a fist into his chest. This child, 6 years old, with a heart that had nearly stopped beating, still remembered him. Still remembered the man in a wheelchair who had appeared at the hospital when I was really, really sick. You remember me? He asked, his voice catching. Lily nodded so hard it was almost comical, her smile bright on her chubby face. You came to the hospital when I was really, really sick. Mom cried a lot. And then you came, and then I got better. Mom said you were an angel. Sebastian looked over at Claire. She stood there, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, but there was a smile on her mouth, the smile of a mother watching her daughter healthy and happy, the smile of a woman who had walked through hell and still found a reason to keep living. Sebastian turned back to Lily, his hand trembling as he reached out to gently stroke the girl's curly hair. I'm not an angel, Lily, but your mom might be. And in that moment, looking into the child's clear eyes and the mother's unbreakable face, Sebastian knew he had to do something. Not because he owed a debt, not because of guilt, but because it was the right thing to do. Lily was taken by Rosa into the other room to play after she'd finished showing Sebastian every last one of her messy little drawings. The tiny apartment sank into silence, with only the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Claire sat down in the chair across from Sebastian, her hands laced together in her lap, her gaze drifting to Daniel's photograph as if she were drawing strength from the man who was gone. You want to know who I am, she said, her voice low and steady, as if she were telling the story of someone else. So I'll tell you. All of it. Sebastian nodded in silence, his eyes never leaving her face. Claire took a deep breath and began. My parents divorced when I was 10. My mother remarried a man she thought would give us a better life. She was wrong. Her voice stayed even, but Sebastian could see her hands tightening. My stepfather never hit me. He was smarter than that. He used words. Every day, day after day, he repeated that I was a burden, that I was useless, that no one would ever love a girl like me. My mother heard all of it, but she never spoke up. She chose him instead of me. Claire paused, her eyes distant, as if she were staring straight into the past. On my 18th birthday, my stepfather left a bag outside my bedroom door. Inside were a few clothes and $200. He said I was old enough to take care of myself, and there was no room for me in that house anymore. My mother stood behind him and didn't say a word. She gave a thin, bitter laugh, a laugh with no joy in it at all. I left with that bag and never went back. I did whatever work I could to survive. Waiting tables, cleaning, bar work, hourly house cleaning. I slept in cheap rooms crawling with bedbugs, ate meals made of nothing but bread and water, but I survived. Her eyes softened when they returned to Daniel's photo. Then I met him. Daniel Sullivan. I was waitressing in a small cafe, and he walked in wearing a sweat-soaked police uniform after a night shift. He ordered a black coffee, and when he saw me crying behind the counter because my manager had just chewed me out, he waited until my shift ended and bought me an ice cream. 1 ice cream. That was the first time in years anyone had done something kind for me without demanding anything in return. Tears began to roll down Claire's cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. We married 6 months later. A small wedding, Just a few of Daniel's friends and Rosa, who'd once been my coworker at a restaurant. We were poor, but we were happy. Then I got pregnant with Lily. Her voice caught. She was born early, at 32 weeks, tiny as a kitten, lying in an incubator with wires and tubes everywhere. The doctors said Lily had a congenital heart condition and would need surgery as soon as she was big enough. The medical bills piled up like a mountain. Daniel took on extra assignments to earn more money. Riskier assignments. Undercover work. The kind they don't tell wives and children about. She stopped, her breathing heavier now. One night, Daniel didn't come home. I waited until morning, waited until noon, waited until the next night. Then there was a knock at the door. 2 uniformed officers stood outside, their faces cold as stone. They told me Daniel had died in the line of duty. They didn't give details. They couldn't. They only handed me a folded flag and empty condolences. Claire closed her eyes, trying to hold back the pain tearing through her chest. Because it was a secret mission. I wasn't entitled to survivor benefits. Not a penny. I lost our home. I lost my job because I had to stay with Lily in the hospital. My family refused to help. 6 months after Daniel's funeral, Lily and I were living in his old car. She opened her eyes and looked straight at Sebastian. Do you know what despair smells like? It smells like mildewed leather seats mixed with the sour milk of a 2-year-old crying from hunger. It smells like a rainy night when water leaks through a car window that won't close all the way. It smells like helplessness when your daughter has a high fever and you don't have the money to buy medicine. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. There was one night when Lily fell asleep from exhaustion, and I sat in the driver's seat, staring out into the black rain. I thought about stepping out and never coming back. I thought about letting everything end. I even opened the car door. Tears spilled freely now, impossible to stop. But then Lily cried. Her small cry echoed in the dark, and I knew I couldn't leave her. I shut the door, pulled her into my arms, and swore that no matter what, I would keep fighting. Claire wiped her tears and drew a deep breath, forcing herself back into steadiness. Rosa found me a week later. She recognized the car parked behind the old restaurant where we used to work together. She gave me a place to sleep, gave me food, and when she heard the Corsetti estate needed a housekeeper, she recommended me for an interview. She looked at Sebastian, her green eyes still wet, yet lit with a strange strength. The first day I met you, you didn't ask about my past. You didn't ask why a 24-year-old woman looked so thin and so pale. You only looked at me and said, "You have honest eyes. That's enough." You gave me the job. You gave me a chance to start over. And now you know who I am. Sebastian sat there without a word, but his eyes said everything. In that gaze, there was none of the pity Claire despised with all her heart, only respect, for someone who had walked through hell and still remained standing. After Claire finished, the room fell into silence for a long time. Sebastian looked at her, looked at the cramped apartment, looked at Lily's messy drawings on the wall, and a decision began to take shape inside his mind. He took a thick stack of documents from his leather bag and set it on the table in front of Claire. "There's a project I've been nurturing for 2 years, he said, his voice low and steady. "Ever since the assassination attempt, ever since I've been forced to live in this wheelchair, I started seeing the world differently. I see people like me, people society leaves behind, people who lose their dignity simply because they're different." Claire picked up the documents and flipped through the first pages. Phoenix Foundation, a support complex for veterans, victims of violence, and people with disabilities. A hotel combined with a rehabilitation center and vocational training, a completely new model. Something New York has never had before. "I want to build a place where people the world has turned its back on can find their dignity again," Sebastian continued. "Not a place they go to be pitied, but a place they go to be seen as ordinary human beings. A place where they can work, learn, and live with their heads held high." Claire looked up from the papers, her green eyes filled with astonishment. This is a wonderful project, sir. But why are you showing it to me?" Sebastian drew a deep breath. "Because I want you to be the chief executive officer of the Phoenix Foundation." The documents nearly slipped from Claire's hands. She stared at him as if he'd grown another head. "Sir, are you joking? I'm just a housekeeper. I don't have a college degree. I don't have management experience. I've never run anything bigger than a cleaning crew." Sebastian shook his head. "You have something no university can teach, Claire. You have a heart that can see people. You've lived through what the people the Phoenix Foundation will serve are living through. You understand them in a way no one with an MBA ever could." Claire stood and moved to the window, looking out, her shoulders drawn tight. What will people say? The housekeeper being lifted up by her employer. They'll say I slept with you to get the position. They'll talk no matter what you do. Sebastian cut in, his voice decisive. The question is whether you'll let them decide your life, or you'll decide it yourself. From behind the curtain divider, Lily's clear little voice called out, Mom, you should help the wheelchair mister the way he helped me. Claire turned back, looked at her daughter peeking out with shining eyes, then looked at Sebastian waiting. She let out a long breath. Give me time to think. This is too big a decision. Sebastian nodded. You have all the time you need. He left the documents and his phone number behind, and then Thomas pushed his chair out of the apartment. On the drive back to the estate, Sebastian's phone began to ring. Catherine Corsetti's name flashed on the screen, and he knew the real storm was coming. My son, his mother's voice was ice from the very first word. I just heard you went to visit that housekeeper. And you're planning to make her the chief executive officer of the Phoenix Foundation? Sebastian didn't ask how she knew. In their world, no secret stayed buried for long. Yes, Mom. Have you lost your mind? Catherine practically shouted into the phone. A chief executive officer for a maid? After everything our family has built? Are you going to turn the Corsetti empire into a joke for all of New York? Sebastian gripped the phone tightly, forcing himself to stay calm. Mom, Claire Sullivan isn't an ordinary housekeeper. She's the widow of a cop, Catherine cut in. Our family doesn't associate with that kind of people. You know that. Our family used to be immigrants without a penny to our name. Did you forget? Sebastian shot back, his voice turning razor cold. Grandfather built this empire with nothing. Father met you when you were still a bar waitress in Little Italy. Or do you want me to remind you in more detail? Silence stretched on the other end of the line. Sebastian knew he'd hit the right weakness. Catherine Corsetti, the powerful matriarch, had once been a poor girl working in a bar before she met Don Corsetti. Do you have feelings for her? His mother's voice finally returned, softer now but still wary. Sebastian hesitated for a moment. I don't know, but I do know she's a good person. And I'm tired of people who are called suitable yet don't have a single ounce of kindness in their hearts. Catherine exhaled on the other end. A long pause followed before she spoke again. All right, but if you insist on doing this, let her compete fairly. A transparent hiring process. An outside panel to evaluate. If she deserves it, she'll prove it herself. And if she doesn't, if she deserves it, you'll accept it? Sebastian asked. We'll consider it, Catherine replied coolly. But if she hurts you, I won't forgive. The call ended. Sebastian stared out through the car window, the city lights sliding past like blurred streaks. For the first time in 3 years, he was looking forward to tomorrow. 2 weeks after Catherine's call, Claire Sullivan stood in front of the Corsetti Enterprises building, in a black suit she'd borrowed from Rosa, her hands gripping an old leather briefcase that held her application file. 50 candidates from across the United States had applied for the chief executive officer position at the Phoenix Foundation. People with degrees from Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, former 5-star hotel executives with decades of experience, rehabilitation specialists with resumes as long as scripture, and Claire Sullivan, a housekeeper with a high school diploma and 7 years of experience cleaning other people's homes. She knew she was the weakest contender, but she also knew she couldn't quit. Every night after work, Rosa came to the small apartment in Brooklyn to help Claire practice. She fired off hundreds of interview questions, from basic financial management to complex crisis scenarios. Claire stayed up until 2 o'clock in the morning reading about hotel operations, about the psychology of disability, about rehabilitation models around the world. Lily slept beside her while Claire kept her eyes open over the pages and a cup of coffee gone cold. The first round was a disaster. A panel of 5 outside experts sat across from Claire with faces cold as stone. They asked about financial strategy, budget projections, key performance indicators. Claire stumbled, sweated, forgot the figures she'd memorized the night before. When she walked out of the interview room, she was sure she'd failed. She sat in the waiting area with her head bowed, her hands shaking. It was over. She'd fooled herself into thinking a housekeeper like her could compete with people who'd been trained for this their whole lives. Then her phone vibrated. A text from Rosa. Did you hear what they said? They said you were the only one who talked about people instead of money. Don't you quit. Claire lifted her head, drew a deep breath, and decided to fight to the end. The second round was a scenario test. A disabled guest had been treated disrespectfully by staff. Claire didn't answer with procedures or policies. She told the truth. Her own story, about the years of being looked through as if she were invisible, about what it felt like to be treated as a burden instead of a human being. The panel listened in silence, and when she finished, one of them nodded slowly. The third round was a deep interview. The final question came from a silver-haired woman with eyes sharp as blades. "Miss Sullivan, you don't have a degree. You don't have management experience. You're the weakest candidate among 50 applicants. Give me one reason, just one single reason, why we should choose you." Claire met the woman's gaze, and for the first time in the entire process, she didn't feel afraid. "Because I've lived what the people the Phoenix Foundation serves are living. I know what it is to be abandoned. I know what it is to be looked down on. I know what it is to sleep in a car with a 2-year-old child burning with fever and not have money for medicine. I know what it is to stand on the edge of despair and still choose to keep living." She paused, her voice dropping lower but staying steady. "The people who come to the Phoenix Foundation don't need the person with the best MBA. They need someone who understands them. They need someone who sees them as human beings, not as numbers in a report. And I can do that, because I used to be them." The interview room fell silent. The silver-haired woman studied Claire for a long moment, then wrote something in her notebook without saying a word. 1 week later, as Claire was preparing dinner in her small apartment, her phone vibrated, an email from Corsetti Enterprises. She opened it with trembling hands, her heart pounding hard in her chest. "Dear Miss Sullivan, congratulations. You have been selected for the position of Chief Executive Officer of the Phoenix Foundation. This decision was made with the unanimous agreement of the entire hiring board. We look forward to working with you." Claire read the email again and again, 4 times, then 5, then 6. Tears began to fall onto the phone screen when she finally believed what she was reading was real. Lily ran to her side, wide eyes fixed on her mother with worry. "Mom, why are you crying?" Claire pulled her daughter into her arms, her smile shining through tears. "Because I'm happy, sweetheart. Because I finally did it." 3 months have passed since the day Claire took the position as Chief Executive Officer of the Phoenix Foundation, and her life has changed completely. The damp Brooklyn apartment is only a memory now, because she and Lily have moved into a small, lovely house on the project grounds. Not a lavish mansion, not a glittering penthouse, just a 2-bedroom home with a little garden out back, where Lily can run and plant flowers without worrying about noise or neighbors complaining. Sebastian offered to have them stay at the Corsetti estate, but Claire refused. She wanted to stand on her own 2 feet, wanted to prove she was here because of ability, not because of anyone's charity. He understood and respected that. But it didn't stop him from visiting them almost every day. Lily was the first to break through the wall Sebastian had built around himself for 3 years. She wasn't afraid of the wheelchair. She didn't avoid his eyes or speak in that pity-soaked tone adults used when they didn't know what to do with his pain. To Lily, Sebastian was simply the wheelchair man, the one who saved her, the one who could tell good stories and teach her how to play chess. Every afternoon after school, Lily would burst into Sebastian's office with flushed cheeks and a bright, fearless smile. "Uncle Sebastian, can we play chess today?" And the most powerful boss in New York, the man who once made the entire underworld tremble, would push meetings and paperwork aside to sit across from a 6-year-old girl and patiently explain each move. "You remember, Lily, right? Your pawn goes straight and captures on the diagonal. Your knight moves in an L shape. But why can't my pawn go backward, Uncle? Because a pawn only moves forward. It never turns back, just like you and your mom." Claire would stand in the doorway, watching the 2 of them bend their heads over the chessboard, and her heart would tighten with a feeling she didn't dare name. Lily needed a father. She'd never had the chance to know Daniel, never had the chance to sit on her father's shoulders or hear him tell bedtime stories. And now, seeing Sebastian with that endless patience for her daughter, Claire felt something inside her chest begin to melt. Late evenings became a habit. After Lily fell asleep, Claire and Sebastian would sit on the balcony outside the Phoenix Foundation office, looking down at the city lights glittering below. They talked about the project, about the challenges of building it, about the team that was slowly taking shape. But little by little, their conversations began to go deeper. One night, when the first chill of autumn wind started to slip through the city, Sebastian talked about the assassination attempt. "We were having dinner," he said, his voice low and far away, as if he were staring into a past he wished he could erase. "My mother, me, and a few of my father's old friends. Our usual restaurant in Little Italy, the place my family's been going for 30 years. I heard a motorcycle engine roaring outside, and then the glass exploded." He stopped, His eyes squeezed shut. I saw a gun aimed at my mother. I didn't think. I just lunged, shoved her to the floor. The bullet went through my back instead of through her heart. Claire stayed silent, her hands tightening around the chair arms. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, Sebastian went on. The doctors said I'd never walk again. My mother sat by the bed, crying without a sound. And I used to think dying would be easier than living like this. She understood that feeling. She understood it more deeply than almost anyone. I used to think that too, she said, her voice as light as breath. After Daniel died, after those nights in the car with Lily, there was one night I almost stepped out and didn't come back. Sebastian turned to look at her, his eyes catching the city glow. What kept you here? Lily's crying, Claire answered, a sad smile flickering across her mouth. She cried in her sleep, and I knew I couldn't leave her. And you? What kept you here? Sebastian was quiet for a long time. Anger, he finally said. I was angry at Lorenzo for taking my legs. I was angry at myself for letting it happen. And I swore I wouldn't give him one more thing. Not my life, not my empire, nothing. They sat in silence, two wounded souls slowly finding peace beside each other. Then Claire spoke about Daniel, about the man who loved her without conditions, about his smile every morning when he woke up, about the way he held her after exhausting workdays. She cried as she talked, and Sebastian didn't say a word. He just listened with absolute respect. When her story ended, they sat there, watching the city drift toward sleep. Sebastian's hand rested on the chair arm, only a few centimeters from Claire's. Then no one could say who moved first, but their fingers touched. Gently, trembling, like they were asking a question they were both afraid to answer. Claire didn't pull her hand away. Sebastian didn't either. They just sat there, hand in hand, watching the city lights shimmer, and no one spoke. Because sometimes silence says more than any words ever could. That night, when Claire went back home, she lay awake for a long time, staring up at the ceiling in the dark. She thought about Daniel, about the man she still loved and always would love. But she also thought about Sebastian, about the way his eyes looked at her, about the feeling of their hands touching. And for the first time in 4 years, Claire Sullivan allowed herself to wonder whether her heart could love again. 1 week after the night their hands touched on the balcony, Sebastian invited Claire to dinner on the Phoenix Foundation rooftop. Not a work meeting, not a conversation about the project or the budget, just him and her, beneath a New York night sky glittering with stars. A small table had been set simply, with candles and white roses. The city lights blinked below like millions of stars that had fallen to the ground. Sebastian sat there in his familiar wheelchair, but tonight he looked different, restless, nervous, like a young man on a first date, instead of a boss who had once ruled an entire underworld empire. They ate and talked about small things, about Lily and her new school, about the construction progress at the Phoenix Foundation, about the crisp chill of New York autumn. But under those ordinary words, something electric ran between them, taut and burning. When dinner ended and the plates were cleared away, Sebastian rolled his wheelchair closer to Claire. His eyes held hers, and in that gaze was something she'd never seen in him before. Tenderness, want, and fear. Claire, his voice dropped, almost a whisper. I need to tell you something, but I'm afraid. Claire tilted her head, her green eyes studying him with gentle curiosity. You, the man who's faced the entire underworld, are afraid? Sebastian gave a soft laugh, but it couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. Bullets don't scare me. Enemies don't scare me. Losing my empire doesn't scare me. He paused and drew a deep breath. But losing you does. Claire's heart seemed to miss a beat. She looked at the man in front of her, the man who had saved her daughter's life without knowing who she was, the man who had given her a chance when the whole world doubted her, the man who had seen her when she believed she'd become invisible. Sebastian, she said, her voice trembling, you know I'm not perfect. I'm a widow with a past full of wounds. I don't have a respectable family or wealth. I only have Lily and years of hardship. I don't need you perfect, Sebastian said at once, his hand reaching out to take hers. I had Victoria, perfect in the eyes of the world, and she left me the moment I needed her most. Claire tightened her grip, feeling the warmth in his trembling fingers. And me, she said, steadier now. I loved a perfect man. Daniel was kind, brave, whole, and I lost him. She paused, meeting Sebastian's eyes. I don't need perfect anymore, Sebastian. I need real. I need someone who sees me as I am. not as people want me to be. Sebastian leaned forward, his other hand lifting Claire's chin with the lightest touch. Their eyes met, and the world around them seemed to disappear. There were only two wounded souls finding each other in the dark. Then he kissed her, softly, shaking, as if she were the most fragile flower he was afraid to break. Claire closed her eyes and returned the kiss with everything she'd been holding back for so many months. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of release. "Mom, you're kissing Uncle Sebastian." Lily's delighted squeal rang out from the doorway and made them both turn in surprise. She stood there with Rosa, eyes shining and a grin stretching across her round face. Rosa was trying to pull the girl away but couldn't manage it. Claire blushed and started to pull her hand from Sebastian's, but he wouldn't let her. He held on tighter and smiled at Lily. "Do you mind, Lily?" he asked, his voice full of love. Lily shook her head so hard her braids bounced, and she ran forward to hug both of them at once. "I don't mind. I'm so happy. Is Uncle Sebastian going to be my new dad, Mom?" Claire looked at Sebastian, then at Lily, then back at Sebastian again. And for the first time in many years, she laughed, truly laughed, the clear sound spilling across the rooftop. The four of them, Claire, Sebastian, Lily, and Rosa, stood there under the New York night, and in that moment they looked like a family beginning to take shape. 4 months of happiness passed like a dream. Claire and Sebastian didn't announce their relationship, but they didn't try to hide it either. Dinners on the rooftop became routine, stolen kisses in the office when no one was looking, nights when Lily fell asleep between the two of them on the living room sofa. The Phoenix Foundation was slowly taking shape, and everything seemed as if it was finally moving in the right direction. Until the real storm hit. That morning, Thomas walked into Sebastian's office with a face as white as paper, holding a brand new hardback book in his hands. On the cover was Victoria Ashford, eyes reddened, her bare face photographed in mournful, tragic light. The title was stamped in blood-red letters, Captive. Life in Hell with the Corsetti Monster. Sebastian took the book, flipped through the first pages, and it felt as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over his head. Victoria wrote about her years with him, as if she were the victim of a psychological abuser, financial control, isolation from friends and family, sick jealousy, threats and intimidation. Every page was a lie wrapped in language soaked with tears and suffering, and millions of people were reading it as if it were the truth. But what truly made Sebastian's blood boil were the passages Victoria wrote about Claire. Housekeeper Sullivan is Sebastian Corsetti's latest instrument. A poor widow elevated to the role of chief executive officer to serve him in every sense of the word. I pity her, because she doesn't know she's walking into the hell I just escaped. That same day, Lorenzo Valenti appeared on the most famous late-night television show in America. He sat there in an expensive suit, handsome face wearing the charming smile that had fooled so many people, and he spoke about Sebastian as if he were a hero exposing a devil. "Sebastian Corsetti is the most dangerous, brutal man in New York," Lorenzo said, his voice full of righteous force. "Victoria nearly lost her life because of him. I'll spend the rest of my life protecting her and protecting this city from his criminal empire. The Phoenix Foundation is just a front for money laundering. Don't let him fool you." The hashtag #CorsettiBeast exploded across social media within hours. Millions of people who had never met Sebastian were demanding justice for Victoria. Thousands of hateful comments flooded the Phoenix Foundation page. Investors began pulling out. Business partners refused to take calls. Construction stalled as contractors grew afraid of being tied to a project the public was boycotting. Everything Sebastian had built over 2 years was collapsing like dominoes. Claire stood beside him in the office, watching the television replay Lorenzo's interview again and again, her eyes filled with disbelief. She knew Victoria was cruel. She knew Lorenzo was dangerous, but she hadn't imagined they could go this far. "Sebastian," she said, her voice shaking, "we have to do something." Before he could answer, the Corsetti attorney's phone rang. The call was brief, but it was enough to shift everything. "Bad news," the lawyer said, voice tight. "Victoria and Lorenzo just filed a lawsuit accusing you of emotional abuse and psychological harm. They're demanding $50 million in damages." Sebastian gripped the wheelchair arm, forcing himself to stay calm. "Is there anything else?" "There is." The lawyer hesitated for a moment. "They've subpoenaed Claire Sullivan as a witness. They want her in court to answer questions about her relationship with you." Claire felt as if the air had been ripped out of her lungs. They didn't just want to destroy Sebastian. They wanted to use her as a weapon against him. They wanted to drag her into the mud, turn her into a puppet in their hateful performance. Sebastian turned his wheelchair toward her, his hand finding hers and holding tight. "They want to use you against me," he said, his voice low, but his eyes burning. "But they don't know they've chosen the wrong opponent." Claire looked at him, into those dark eyes now lit with determination, and she knew the real battle was only beginning. But this time, she wouldn't run. This time, she would stand beside him and fight. If Victoria's book and Lorenzo's interview were arrows aimed at Sebastian, what happened next were knives driven straight into Claire's heart. The media began digging into her past like vultures catching the scent of a corpse. From housekeeper to CEO, Cinderella or con artist. That headline splashed across the front page of a famous tabloid, alongside a stolen photograph of Claire walking into the Phoenix Foundation office. They found her old apartment in Brooklyn. They questioned former neighbors with cruel, loaded questions. They dug into Daniel's record, raising insinuations about his suspicious death on a secret assignment no one had the right to describe. Husband dies under mysterious circumstances. Wife quickly climbs into a mafia boss's bed. Coincidence or conspiracy? Another article wrote, and Claire had to read it 3 times before she could believe someone had actually put something so monstrous about her life into print. They didn't care about the truth. They didn't care that Daniel died protecting this city. They only cared about drama, about scandal that could sell papers and pull clicks. But the worst part wasn't the articles. The worst thing happened on a Wednesday morning, when Claire's phone rang in the middle of an important meeting. The school's number. Her heart seemed to stop as she answered. "Miss Sullivan, please come to the school right away. Something happened with Lily." Claire didn't remember how she drove there. She only remembered walking into the principal's office and seeing her daughter sitting there with reddened eyes, a swollen cheek, and scratches along her small arm. A boy 2 years older than Lily sat in the chair across from her, his nose bleeding, his parents behind him with angry faces. "What happened?" Claire asked, her voice shaking as she dropped to her knees beside her child. Lily didn't answer. She only clung to her mother and sobbed, the sound tearing through the room. The principal, a middle-aged man with a face cold as stone, read the report in a voice without emotion. Lily Sullivan attacked a classmate during recess. She punched Tommy Richardson in the nose and scratched his face. "My daughter would never hit someone for no reason," Claire said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "What did he say to her before that?" Silence. The principal stared down at his desk. Tommy's parents looked away. No one wanted to answer. "Lily," Claire said softly, lifting her daughter's chin. "Can you tell Mommy? What did he say to you?" Lily's voice cracked between sobs. He said you're a liar. He said you slept with the mafia to get money. He said Dad died because he was ashamed to have you." Claire felt as if someone had wrapped a fist around her heart and squeezed. She turned to the principal, her green eyes now burning with a fire she hadn't known she had. "My daughter is being bullied with words like that, and you're going to suspend her?" "Miss Sullivan," the principal said, his voice awkward now. "Violence is unacceptable under any circumstances. And with the recent news about your relationship, we have to protect the school's reputation." Claire rose to her feet, spine straight, chin lifted high. "Reputation? You're worried about reputation while you allow an older child to bully a 6-year-old girl about her mother? While you let my daughter hear filthy words no child should ever have to hear." She took Lily's hand and walked toward the door. "My daughter won't be coming back to this school, and you'll be receiving a letter from my attorney about allowing bullying on school grounds." That night, Claire lay beside Lily on the small bed, stroking her daughter's hair until she fell asleep. But Lily's sleep wasn't peaceful. In the middle of the night, she began to scream, her small hands flailing in the dark. "Don't hit my mom. Don't hit my mom. Mommy, don't go." Claire held her tight, tears running down her cheeks as she tried to pull her out of the nightmare. It was the first time Lily had had nightmares in 2 years. 2 years since Sebastian paid for the surgery, and their life began to steady. And now everything was collapsing. Because of Victoria's lies, because of Lorenzo's cruelty, because of blood-hungry media that didn't care who got hurt as long as they had a story to tell. Claire held Lily in the dark, listening to her daughter's breathing slowly even out again. And for the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she wondered whether she was destroying her child's life in pursuit of her own happiness. At 11 o'clock that night, 2 days after what happened at school, Claire stood at the door of Sebastian's office with a resignation letter in her hand. Lily was asleep, but the nightmares still haunted the little girl every night. The sound of her daughter crying in her sleep echoed in Claire's ears like a wordless sentence. She couldn't keep going like this. She couldn't watch her child be destroyed because of Claire's choices. Sebastian was sitting by the window when Claire stepped inside, the city lights painting his face in alternating bands of shadow and glow. He turned at the sound of the door, and he immediately saw that something was wrong in her eyes. "Claire? What's going on?" Claire set the letter on his desk, her hands trembling. "I came to tell you I'm resigning, and I think we should stop." Sebastian looked as if someone had slapped him hard enough to crack the air. "Stop? What are you talking about? Can't you see?" Claire's voice broke, everything she'd been holding back for days spilling out at once. "I'm dragging you down. The project is dying because of me. Investors are pulling out because of me. The media is attacking you because of me. And Lily..." Her throat tightened until she couldn't finish. "She's having nightmares every night because of me. She's being bullied at school because of me. I'm destroying my daughter's life just because I'm selfish enough to want to be with you." Sebastian pushed his wheelchair closer, his eyes burning with something Claire had never seen in him before. "You call that selfish? You call loving someone selfish? You don't understand." Claire was almost shouting now, tears pouring down without control. "You're rich. You're powerful. You've got an empire to protect you. And me? I have nothing but Lily. She's everything I have. And now she's suffering because I love you." The last words ripped out of Claire like a desperate scream, and she froze the moment she realized what she'd said. "I love you." The first time she'd spoken it out loud. Silence flooded the room. Sebastian stared at her, his dark eyes shining under the light. Then he reached out, took her trembling hand, and pulled her closer. "Claire, look at me." She didn't want to. She was afraid that if she looked into his eyes, she wouldn't have the strength to leave. But Sebastian's hand lifted her chin, making her face him. "Do you think I'm going to let you go?" His voice was low and unshakable. "Do you think I'm going to sit here and watch you walk out of my life without saying anything?" "Sebastian, I love you, Claire Sullivan." The words came out like an oath, like a promise, like a truth he'd been holding too long. "I don't love you because you saved me on my wedding day. I love you because you were the first person who saw me as a human being since the day I ended up in this wheelchair. I love you because you're strong, because you're relentless, because you've walked through hell and still kept a kind heart." Claire's tears fell like rain, but she couldn't turn away. "Do you think quitting will solve anything?" Sebastian went on, his voice gentler now but no less fierce. "Do you think Victoria and Lorenzo will stop if you leave? No. They'll keep destroying me, keep destroying you, keep destroying anyone who dares to stand up to them. Running isn't the answer. Fighting is." "I'm scared," Claire whispered, her voice no bigger than breath. "I'm so scared I can't breathe. I'm scared of losing Lily. I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared of everything." Sebastian drew her down until his forehead touched hers. "Then we'll be scared together. But we don't quit. Not ever." Claire closed her eyes, feeling his warm breath against her cheek, feeling strength in the way his hand held hers. And in that moment, she made her decision. "I love you too," she whispered. "I love you so much it scares me. But I won't run anymore. We'll fight. Together." Sebastian kissed her. A kiss salty with tears, but sweet with hope. They held each other in the dark of the room, two wounded souls finding strength in each other's arms. And when the kiss ended, Claire knew that no matter how violent the storm became, she wouldn't face it alone again. The next morning, when the first sunlight of a new day streamed through the office window, Sebastian called Claire into his private room with an unusually grave expression. He'd been awake all night, wrestling with himself over whether he should say this at all. But after last night, after Claire chose to stay and fight beside him, he knew she deserved the truth, the whole truth. "Claire, sit down," he said, his voice low and heavy. "There's something I have to tell you. About Daniel." Claire went still at the sound of her late husband's name. She lowered herself into the chair across from Sebastian, her green eyes fixed on him with confusion and fear. "About Daniel? What do you know about him?" Sebastian drew a deep breath, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair, as if he needed something solid to keep him steady enough to say what he'd kept buried. "Thomas has been investigating Lorenzo for the past 6 months to prepare for the lawsuit, and during that, he found something." He paused, looking straight into Claire's eyes. "Daniel didn't die on an ordinary assignment. He died because he was investigating the Valenti gang." Claire felt as if the air had been yanked from her lungs. "Valenti? Lorenzo Valenti?" Sebastian nodded, his face twisted with a pain that made it look as though he were bearing the wound himself. "Daniel discovered Lorenzo was tied to a human trafficking and weapons trafficking operation. He gathered evidence. He was ready to expose him. And Lorenzo found out. He ordered Daniel killed before he could report it. The world around Claire seemed to collapse. She sat there, frozen, unable to believe what she'd just heard. Lorenzo Valenti, the man in bed with Victoria, the man on television playing the hero, the man suing Sebastian and subpoenaing her to court. He was the one who killed her husband. 4 years, Claire whispered, her voice cracking like glass. 4 years I didn't know who killed Daniel. 4 years living in the dark, asking myself why he had to die. 4 years raising our child alone, suffering alone, while my husband's murderer was out there living like a prince. Tears began to slide down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of rage, boiling hot in her chest. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice tight with grief. "Because I only just found out," Sebastian answered, his hand reaching for hers and holding on. "Thomas found the evidence 2 weeks ago. I didn't want to speak until we were certain. I didn't want you to suffer over something that might not be true." Claire closed her eyes, fighting to contain the storm tearing through her mind. Daniel, the man who loved her without conditions, the man who gave her Lily, the man who gave his life to protect this city from people like Lorenzo. And Lorenzo killed him as easily as crushing an insect. "I'm sorry," Sebastian said, his voice raw with pain. "I swear to you, Lorenzo will pay. I will." "No," Claire cut in, her eyes snapping open, and Sebastian saw something had changed inside them. There were no more tears, no more softness, only fire. The fire of resolve, the fire of justice. "Not you will," she said, her voice hard as steel. "We will. We will make him pay. Not with violence, not with the underworld, but with the law, with the truth, by living better than he ever could." She stood, spine straight, chin lifted. This was no longer the Claire Sullivan of yesterday, the woman trembling on the edge of surrender. This was a new Claire Sullivan, a woman who had turned grief into strength, turned tears into a weapon. "Daniel died trying to expose Lorenzo," she said. "He didn't get to finish that mission, but I will finish it for him. I will stand in court, look the man who killed my husband straight in the eye, and I will watch him be brought to justice." Sebastian looked at her, and in that moment he knew Victoria and Lorenzo had underestimated this woman. They thought she was only a fragile widow who could be threatened and bent. They were wrong. They had just awakened a warrior. 3 weeks after the day Claire learned the truth about Daniel, the Manhattan courthouse was packed to the seams. Reporters poured in from everywhere. Cameras lined the hallways, and hundreds of curious onlookers had been standing in line since early morning, hoping to get inside and witness the trial of the century. Victoria Ashford was suing Sebastian Corsetti for $50 million in emotional damages, and the entire country was watching every moment. Victoria arrived in a modest black dress, her face bare of makeup, her eyes reddened as if she'd been crying all night. She sat at the plaintiff's table with an army of attorneys, lifting a handkerchief to dab at her eyes whenever a camera turned toward her. Lorenzo Valenti sat in the gallery directly behind Victoria, wearing the confident expression of a man who believed he'd already won. Sebastian sat at the defense table, back straight, his face unreadable. Claire sat directly behind him, her hand gripping Lily's hand tightly as Rosa watched the child. The trial opened with Victoria's attorney presenting their case. They told a tear-soaked story of a woman controlled, isolated, and threatened by a ruthless mafia boss. Victoria was called to the witness stand, and she performed flawlessly. Her voice trembled as she described nights of fear. Tears slid down her cheeks as she spoke about what it felt like to be trapped in a toxic relationship. She even looked at Sebastian with wounded eyes, as if he were the man who had destroyed her life. Then it was Sebastian's attorney's turn, and everything began to turn. "Your Honor." Sebastian's counsel rose, calm but heavy with authority. "We have evidence that Victoria Ashford and Lorenzo Valenti planned this disappearance 6 months before the wedding date." The courtroom screen lit up, displaying a long thread of messages between Victoria and Lorenzo. Romantic messages, planning messages, messages mocking Sebastian and discussing how to humiliate him in the most painful way possible. "You leave the cripple right in front of 350 guests," one message from Lorenzo read. "That's how you kill a man without a gun." A murmur surged through the courtroom. Victoria's face drained of color. Lorenzo shifted in his seat, suddenly unable to sit still, but Sebastian's attorney wasn't finished. "We also have this recording," he said, and pressed play. Lorenzo's voice filled the courtroom, clear and undeniable. "Sebastian Corsetti will be destroyed, not with bullets, but with scandal. Victoria plays the victim, I play the hero, and the cripple loses everything, his empire, his honor, And if we're lucky, his life. The courtroom erupted. The judge had to slam her gavel again and again to restore order. Victoria stared at Lorenzo with panic in her eyes, but his confidence from minutes earlier was gone. Then Sebastian's attorney delivered the final bomb. Your Honor, we have also received evidence from the FBI regarding Lorenzo Valenti's illegal activities. This evidence includes human trafficking, weapons trafficking, and most importantly, he paused, looking directly at Lorenzo, the hit order on Officer Daniel Sullivan 4 years ago. The courtroom dropped into dead silence. Lorenzo shot to his feet, his face warping with fear and rage. 2 FBI agents who had been waiting by the door began moving toward him. At this time, we call our witness, Claire Sullivan, to the stand, Sebastian's attorney said. Claire rose, her legs trembling, but her spine straight. She walked to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Then she began to speak. She spoke of Daniel, the brave police officer who loved her when she had nothing. She spoke of the night he never came home, of the knock at the door from uniformed men who told her he had died in the line of duty. She spoke of Lily, the premature baby with a fragile heart, of the years she fought to keep her child alive. She spoke of Sebastian, the man who saved her daughter's life without needing to know who she was. And finally, she looked straight into Victoria's eyes. You asked whether I have a romantic relationship with Sebastian Corsetti, Claire said, her voice carrying through the silent room. Yes, I love him. But I'm not standing here because of love. I'm standing here because of justice. She turned toward Lorenzo, her green eyes burning with a fire no one could extinguish. 4 years ago, he ordered my husband killed. Daniel Sullivan died trying to expose his crimes. For 4 years, I raised our child alone, not knowing who stole my daughter's father from her. And now he's sitting here demanding $50 million in damages while his hands are stained with my husband's blood. Claire turned back to Victoria. And you got engaged to Sebastian and then ran away with the man who ordered a murder. You climbed into bed with a killer and played the victim. Do you truly think you're the victim here? The courtroom exploded again. Some people clapped. Some wiped away tears. The judge hammered the gavel repeatedly to regain control. Then she looked toward Lorenzo with a stern, unflinching face. Lorenzo Valenti, based on the FBI evidence presented, you are taken into custody immediately pending trial on charges of human trafficking, weapons trafficking, and ordering a murder. Lorenzo lunged as if to run, but the 2 FBI agents blocked him. Corsetti, he screamed as the cuffs locked around his wrists. I'll kill you. I swear I'll kill you. Sebastian stared back at him with a face like stone. You tried last time. You saw how that turned out. Lorenzo was dragged out between his own screams and curses. Victoria collapsed back into her chair, her face white as paper, tears spilling down, but this time no one believed they were the tears of a victim. She knew she'd lost, completely and beyond saving. The verdict came down 2 days after the explosive trial. The judge declared that every allegation Victoria Ashford had made against Sebastian Corsetti was dismissed. There was no evidence of emotional abuse, no evidence of control or threats. On the contrary, Victoria herself was found guilty of perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud, ordered to pay Sebastian $5 million in damages, and sentenced to 2 years of suspended prison time. Lorenzo Valenti wasn't so fortunate. With the FBI's evidence of human trafficking, weapons trafficking, and most importantly the hit order on Officer Daniel Sullivan, he was denied bail and faced a life sentence. When Lorenzo was led out of the courthouse in shackles, he was still screaming insane threats, but no one was afraid of him anymore. The boss who once terrified the entire city was now nothing more than a pathetic criminal being taken back to where he belonged. Outside the courthouse, hundreds of reporters swarmed Sebastian and Claire. Questions flew like rain. Flashbulbs burst without stop. But Sebastian offered only one sentence. Today, justice won. Not because of money or power, but because of truth. And truth always wins. Claire stood beside him, hand in hand, her head held high. She wasn't the trembling woman afraid of camera lenses anymore. She was a warrior who had walked through the storm and stayed standing. 6 months later, the Phoenix Foundation officially opened. A 12-story building rose in the heart of Manhattan, with a hotel, a rehabilitation center, a vocational training facility, and dozens of support programs for veterans, victims of violence, and people with disabilities. Hundreds attended the opening ceremony, from city officials to investors. From the very people the Phoenix Foundation would serve, to the volunteers who had helped build it from the earliest days. Lily was given the honor of cutting the ribbon alongside Sebastian. She stood on a small chair to reach the red ribbon, pulling the oversized scissors with help from the man in the wheelchair. Applause thundered when the ribbon fell, and Lily beamed, waving to the crowd like a tiny star. Claire stood behind them, tears glimmering at the corners of her eyes as she watched her daughter and the man she loved. A year ago, she'd been living in a damp Brooklyn apartment, worrying about every meal for Lily. Now she was the chief executive officer of one of New York's most watched nonprofits, and her daughter was laughing beside the man who had saved her life twice. Life could be miraculous. That night, after the ceremony ended and the last guests had gone home, Sebastian invited Claire up to the Phoenix Foundation rooftop, the place where they'd kissed for the first time, the place where they'd chosen to fight together, the place where, now, beneath a New York night sky glittering as if it had been dusted with diamonds, Sebastian would ask her the most important question of his life. A small table was set with candles and white roses, just like the first night they'd had dinner together. Moon River played softly from a small speaker, the familiar melody of the dance that changed their lives. Sebastian took Claire's hand, his eyes shining in the candlelight. "Claire," he said, his voice shaking in a way that was unusual for the man who had once ruled an empire. "A year ago, you asked me a question in a garden full of people laughing at me. You asked me if I wanted to dance with you, and that question changed my life forever." He pulled a red velvet box from his jacket pocket and opened it. Inside was a simple diamond ring, sparkling like a small star. "I can't kneel the way other men do," Sebastian said, his voice thick, "but if I could, I'd kneel at your feet and beg you. Claire Sullivan, you didn't save me just once. You saved me every day after that. You gave me a reason to live, to fight, to believe in love again. Will you be my wife?" Claire lifted a hand to cover her mouth, tears spilling freely. She tried to answer, but before she could speak, a clear little voice burst from the doorway. "Say yes, Mom. Say yes." Lily came running out from wherever Rosa had been hiding her, eyes bright as two stars, her wide grin taking over her round face. She skipped to Sebastian and Claire and grabbed both their hands. Claire laughed through tears, looked at her daughter, then looked at the man waiting with his heart balanced on the edge of a wave. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with happiness. 1,000 times yes. Sebastian slid the ring onto Claire's finger, then pulled both her and Lily into his arms. The three of them held each other beneath the New York night, laughter and happy tears blending together. Rosa stood in the doorway, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief, while Thomas smiled, looking truly joyful for the first time in many years. And on the Phoenix Foundation rooftop, the place that had once witnessed bitter tears and brave decisions, it now witnessed the beginning of a new family. 3 months after the proposal on the rooftop, the wedding of Sebastian Corsetti and Claire Sullivan took place on a Hamptons beach in the most breathtaking sunset light. There were no 350 elite guests like the wedding with Victoria. No grand garden, no extravagant banquet tables, just 50 of the people who mattered most, seated on white wooden chairs, lined up on the sand, facing the vast ocean and a sky turning a blazing orange-red. Wildflowers sat in simple glass jars. Waves lapped softly at the shore like the most perfect music beneath it all, and the air was full of love instead of power games. Before the ceremony, in a small room of the seaside house, Catherine Corsetti stepped inside as Rosa helped Claire adjust her simple white wedding dress. The powerful matriarch of the Corsetti family stood there for a long moment, studying the woman about to become her daughter-in-law with an expression Claire couldn't read. "Let me speak with her alone," Catherine said to Rosa, her voice no longer as icy as it had been in the beginning. Rosa nodded and stepped out, closing the door behind her. Claire stood straight, bracing herself for whatever Catherine was about to say. But instead of warnings or threats, Catherine reached into her handbag and drew out an old velvet box. "This is the Corsetti family pearl necklace," Catherine said, opening it. Inside lay a strand of ivory pearls with an emerald at the center, shimmering under the light like a tear pulled from the sea. 4 generations of women in this family have worn it on their wedding day. My mother-in-law gave it to me, and now I give it to you." Claire froze. You called me what?" Catherine smiled. The first smile Claire had ever seen softened that stern face. "Daughter-in-law. I didn't accept you at first. I thought you weren't worthy of my son. I was wrong." She stepped closer and placed the pearls around Claire's neck with her own hands. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to Sebastian. You brought him light when I thought he would be lost in darkness forever, and for that, I'm grateful to you." Claire wrapped her arms around Catherine, tears sliding down her cheeks. The two women held each other in silence, and when they pulled apart, Claire knew she hadn't just gained a husband, she'd gained a family. The ceremony began as the sunset set the sky on fire. Lily walked ahead, scattering flower petals, eyes shining, smile wide in a fluffy white dress. Claire followed behind, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, her gaze seeing only one person at the end of the aisle. Sebastian sat in his wheelchair, but to Claire he had never looked taller or more beautiful. Vows were exchanged beneath the glowing horizon. Sebastian spoke first, his voice shaking with emotion. "I swear I will love you, Claire Sullivan, not in spite of the years you were poor, but including those years, because they made you who you are today. I swear I will stand beside you in a wheelchair or on my feet, because you saw me when the whole world looked away." Claire held his hand tightly, her voice thick with tears, but steady all the same. "I swear I will love you, Sebastian Corsetti, not in spite of the wheelchair, but including this wheelchair, because it's part of you. I swear I will dance with you in our own way, every day, until my last breath." When they kissed, 50 people applauded. The ocean seemed to bless them with its rhythm, and Lily ran forward to hug them both. "Now we're really a family," she squealed. Sebastian gathered Lily into his arms and kissed her forehead. "We always were, my girl." Their first dance began when Moon River drifted into the air. Claire guided the wheelchair gently over the sand, turning, leaning down to take Sebastian's hand, exactly like the dance that changed their lives a year earlier. But this time there were no 350 judging eyes, only 50 loving hearts bearing witness. No one knew that a few hundred meters away, on the road leading down to the beach, a woman was standing and watching. Victoria Ashford looked thin and worn, the old glittering pride gone. She stood there watching Sebastian smile at Claire in a way he had never smiled at her, watching the happiness she had thrown away to chase Lorenzo, the man now rotting in prison. Tears slid down Victoria's cheeks, but they weren't the tears of true repentance. They were the tears of a loser, of someone who gambled everything and lost it all. She looked one last time, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness as it fell. No one saw her. No one cared where she went, because on that beach, under the rising moon, Sebastian and Claire kept dancing, Lily kept laughing, and a new family was beginning their story. 5 years after the wedding on the Hamptons beach, Sebastian and Claire's life had gone far beyond any dream they'd ever dared to hold. The Phoenix Foundation was no longer a single building in Manhattan. Now 10 facilities stretched across the United States, from New York to Los Angeles, from Chicago to Miami, and they'd helped more than 50,000 veterans, victims of violence, and people with disabilities reclaim their dignity and build new lives. Claire was still the chief executive officer, but now she had an incredible team beside her, people who believed in the mission she and Sebastian had set in motion. Their family had grown too. Lily was 11 now, a bright, compassionate girl with a dream of becoming a cardiologist. "I want to save babies like I used to be," she would say, and every time Claire heard her daughter say it, tears would come to her eyes with pride. Alongside Lily, Sebastian and Claire had 3 more children. Daniel Jr., their 4-year-old son named after Lily's late father, was their first biological child. And they had 2 adopted children as well. Emma, an 8-year-old girl with a mobility disability, and Michael, a 6-year-old boy who'd lived in an orphanage through his earliest years. Sebastian said he wanted to build a family where every child was loved no matter their circumstances or their limitations, and Claire loved him more every day for that. Every year, on the anniversary of Sebastian's almost wedding with Victoria, the Phoenix Foundation hosted a special event called the Phoenix Ball. It was a dance gala for people with disabilities and their caregivers, a night where hundreds of couples could dance in their own way, in wheelchairs, with crutches, with prosthetic legs, and everyone smiled, and everyone was seen as whole. Claire was the one who taught them the first dance, and every year she ended the night by dancing with Sebastian beneath the sparkling lights, Moon River playing like a reminder of where it all began. During an interview marking 5 years of the Phoenix Ball, a reporter asked Claire the question she'd heard hundreds of times. "What made you step forward that day, in a garden full of strangers?" Claire looked toward Sebastian playing with the children in the corner, a smile lifting her mouth. "I saw a man who needed to be seen as a human being, and I remembered that he had seen my daughter when no one else did. Sometimes courage is just daring to ask one simple question. Would you like to dance with me? And sometimes love doesn't start with a kiss. It starts with a hand reaching out in the dark." The reporter nodded, eyes shining. "Do you have any advice for people going through hard times?" Claire thought for a moment before she answered. "Don't ever let your circumstances define who you are. I used to be a poor widow living in a car with a sick child. Now I'm the chief executive officer of an organization that helps tens of thousands of people. Not because I'm special, but because I didn't quit, and because I met people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself anymore. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had sunk into quiet, Sebastian and Claire sat on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Hand in hand, they didn't need words, because the silence between them held everything that needed to be said. Some stories end with the words happily ever after. But their story didn't end. It continued every day, in every dance, every smile, every hand held tight. Because real love isn't a destination. Love is a journey. And Sebastian and Claire's journey was only beginning. This story reminds us that human dignity doesn't live in wealth or physical wholeness. It lives in how we treat each other. That true love doesn't demand perfection. It demands sincerity. And that sometimes, one small act from the heart can change an entire life. If this story touched your heart, please like and share this video to spread the message of love to more people. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss moving stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever had someone reach out a hand to help you in your hardest moment? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We truly want to hear stories from the deepest part of your heart. Thank you for staying with us to the end of the video. Wishing everyone watching good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.